I think you will all agree with me when I say that one cannot really call themselves a martial arts movie enthusiast unless they are familiar with the legacy of Shaw Brothers. It is a story of grit, passion, and vision that allowed the Shaw Brothers to build an entertainment empire stretched from Shanghai to Hong Kong, and the popularity of some of their movies have spread all over the world. I still remember the craze behind these films back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and by then Shaw Brothers Studio was operating like a full-blown industrial machine. Sometimes they churned out movies faster than their audience could consume, and I find the rise of this industry rather fascinating. It all started with four brothers who grew up with both Chinese and Western influences in Shanghai, and later, the eldest brother started off in the entertainment industry with a theater. The expansion story is crazy because over the next few decades, Shanghai went on to become China's Hollywood, and by the time they emerged as a global force in Hong Kong, they had way too many classics under their belt. Of course, like all good things, this one had to end as well, but not before leaving a mark on global cinema. I thought this might be a good time for some fan service as I celebrate the legacy of the Shaw Brothers by exploring some of their finest movies. The 36th Chamber of Shaolin, 1978. When I think of martial arts cinema, this is one of the first films that comes to mind, and I simply love the fictionalized version of a legendary Shaolin martial arts disciple, San Te, who lived in the Qing dynasty from the 17th century. It tells the story of the anti-Qing patriots who have secretly set up their base in Canton under the guidance of Ho Kwang Han. They work as schoolmasters, and when one of the students has his entire family slaughtered by the enemies, he joins the Shaolin Temple to study martial arts and avenge his loved ones. But his journey is far from linear, and he soon learns a lot more than just kung fu as he matures into a wise warrior. The movie totally deserved to win the Best Martial Arts Award at the 24th Asian Film Festival, and I think the cult status is justified. It changed the career graph of both the director, Jia-Ling Liu, and the lead actor, and take my word for this when I say that the movie offers some of the coolest Shaolin training sequences ever. You get to see everything from the rigorous training methods to the classic water crossing scenes. I find it hard to tell that the film comes from a first-time director, and the fact that the film actually has a proper story says a lot about the quality. Also, I understand now why Tarantino picked the star Cha Hui-Liu for 2 parts in his Kill Bill double. The last part of the movie is the memorable revenge on the sadistic Manchus, and this also brings some exciting fight sequences. Overall, this is a movie that can be the poster boy of kung fu cinema, and it is also a nice one to introduce someone to the genre. The Boxer from Shantung, 1972. Don't we all love the story of the struggling underdog who fights against all odds? Well, this one is all about that, as it explores the life of Ma Yongcheng, a boxer who leaves Shantung for a better life, and ends up in Shanghai. However, what was supposed to be a way to get rid of his poverty soon becomes a life just like his idol, a kung fu master who moved to Shanghai and became a respected gangster. Cheng ends up finding employment with a local gangster, and things start to look up for him when he defeats an undefeatable foreign champion. But soon he walks right into the trap set by a rival gangster, and things take a serious turn as Cheng seeks redemption and a way out of this trouble. If you consider the usual Shaw Brothers movies, they took roughly 2 months to be completed. For this film, however, the schedule was even tighter, and they had to wrap up within a month. This required 2 directors on the job, Che Chang for the night shoots and Shui Li Pao for the night shoots. I think this is the best example of the efficiency of these movies because never for once does it seem like the filmmaking was hurried. I cannot say this is the most authentic and original martial arts film out there, but it is certainly one of the most entertaining ones that you will find. I find it a bit strange that the film has a melancholy air around it, where some of the characters are fleeing from Shanghai as war approaches. It does change the whole mood for a while, especially with the sad music. I strongly recommend watching this one because it is one of those martial arts movies that promises loads of fighting with a gripping story, a rare breed. Legendary Weapons of China, 1982. I have found the reference to the Qing dynasty on many Shaw Brothers films, and the Legendary Weapons of China happens to be one of them. This wuxia film by Liu Cha-liang is premised during the late Qing dynasty, and the story unfolds as Empress Dowager Cixi dispatches her agents to various factions of the Boxer Rebellion in order to find supernatural martial artists who are invulnerable to Western bullets. However, things take an unplanned turn when one of the leaders of these groups disbands his forces, and this leads to the assassins from the other factions hunting him down for this treasonous act. But what really is going on here, and what does the treasonous warrior want? You got to watch the film to find out, because I get enough abuses in the comments for the spoilers. I consider this film to be relatively underrated given the reputation of some of the other popular Shaw Brothers hits. The director Liu Cha-liang is known for redefining the kung fu genre, and he proves his skills with this one. The movie masterfully combines humor, a decent plot, and some unforgettable martial artistry. Yes, the special effects are cheap, but such is the demand of the industry, and you know how it was for Hong Kong martial arts films back then. I really like the element of magic in the film, and I think if someone likes the genre, there is just no way around this movie. Some have criticized the movie for trying a bit too much and too hard, but for me, that is the whole charm of these films, and I don't mind all the entertainment on offer. My Young Auntie, 1980-1981. There was a moment right around the turn of the decade when Shaw Brothers could have kept playing the hits forever. And then Lau Kar-long, already a living legend of kung fu authenticity, decided to change the path. My Young Auntie is his glorious curveball, a period martial arts comedy with real heat in the limbs and real heart under the laughs, built around an idea that feels instantly absurd and weirdly perfect. What if the respected elder in a traditional household is a young woman who suddenly outranks everybody? That's the spark, and it lights the whole movie on fire. Kar Hui arrives like a thunderclap. She plays Cheng Tai Nun, a young martial artist who becomes auntie through a marriage arrangement that turns into a social grenade. Every stance is crisp, every kick lands with that Shaw snap, and every smug grin feels earned. She'd go on to win Best Actress at the very first Hong Kong Film Awards, and honestly, the performance still plays like a victory lap for me. The story is a comedy of errors with Knuckles. Tai Nun rolls into Canton and instantly becomes the household authority, while the men around her scramble to save face, protect pride, and pretend they're not getting emotionally folded in half by someone half their age with twice their discipline. Lau Kar-long himself and Gordon Liu show up in the mix, and the film keeps bouncing between romantic chaos, family tension, and sudden bursts of beautifully staged violence. You get these iconic sequences where flirtation turns into footwork, where a petty dispute becomes a public humiliation, where comedy timing and combat timing merge into the same rhythm. One minute you're laughing at how hard tradition is getting roasted, the next you're staring at a fight scene that's pure craft. What makes it sing as a martial arts movie is that the action never becomes joke fighting. The comedy is the wrapper, not the excuse. Decades later, it's got that cult-perfect rewatch glow, the kind of Shaw film you throw on for fun and end up admiring like a masterclass. The Five Deadly Venoms, 1978. I still remember the first time the Five Deadly Venoms hit like a fever dream you couldn't shake. Shaw Brothers had already given the world plenty of righteous heroes and clean moral math, but this one slithered in with something nastier and more modern: suspicion and paranoia. This is a martial arts movie that plays like a murder mystery, where every handshake might be a setup and every friendly smile might be a mask. It was directed by Chang Che, the godfather of bruised masculinity and operatic violence, working with writer Ni Kuang to engineer a masterpiece. The hook is deadly simple. A dying master sends his last disciple out into the world with one mission: to find the 5 former students who learned the deadliest styles in the school and stop them if they've turned rotten. For me, that's the kind of setup that instantly creates tension, because it's more than going up against the villain. Chang turns that uncertainty into oxygen. Every new character introduction feels like a clue and a threat at the same time. And the cast is where the legend truly forms. The movie effectively unveils the group that international audiences would later nickname the Venom Mob, a lineup of performers who moved like they were designed in a lab. You're constantly learning the rules of each style as the characters do, which makes every clash feel like an evolving puzzle instead of a loop of punches. I love how the iconic moments land without needing to spoil the whole game. What makes it a must-watch is how it weaponizes the genre's own pleasures. It's a martial arts film where paranoia is part of the choreography, and the emotional undercurrent is this bleak idea that power without character always becomes poison. No wonder it became a cult cornerstone. If you have been sleeping on this one, you really need to check it out soon. 5-Element Ninjas, 1982. If you want proof that Shaw Brothers could still feel dangerous in the early 80s, 5-Element Ninjas is the film you throw at somebody who thinks the studio only did clean old-school kung fu. This one is warfare. It's Chang Cheh in his late-era laboratory mode, mixing martial arts cinema with pure sadistic imagination and building a perfect revenge story. He directs, and the concept is immediately irresistible, where a Chinese martial arts school gets humiliated by rivals, so they hire elite Japanese ninja to wipe the competition off the map. The massacre happens, one survivor crawls out of the wreckage, and the only path forward is learning the enemy's secrets and coming back with equal cruelty. What makes it feel so different from the usual tournament and honor formula is how it treats combat like environmental horror. You feel the filmmakers delighting in the idea that the battlefield itself can betray you. One minute you're watching a standard exchange of technique, the next you're watching the floor become a weapon, the air become a weapon, the water around a fighter become the last thing they ever feel. The survivor's arc isn't just get stronger, it's get stranger. He has to abandon familiar codes and learn a style built on deception, misdirection, and survival at any cost. The cast brings the right kind of intensity, and the fights are staged with a vicious clarity. You always understand where the danger is coming from, which makes the surprises hit harder because you thought you were safe. I realize now that thematically it's about cultural fear and fascination. By the end of it all, you don't just feel satisfaction, you feel like you watched someone get reforged in hell and come back sharper. My verdict is that the movie is outrageous, brutal, and endlessly inventive, the kind of Shaw film you show a friend and watch their face change as they realize they've underestimated the studio's capacity for pure cinematic violence. 面前起立破戒。The 8-Diagram Pole Fighter, 1984. If you ever needed one Shaw Brothers film to prove that martial arts cinema can hit like tragedy, not just spectacle, the 8-Diagram Pole Fighter is the answer. Lau Kar-long directs it like a man carving grief into wood, and the result feels less like a simple revenge movie and more like a war hymn that learned how to swing a staff. I saw it when it was still fresh, and I can tell you this, that the audience wasn't just cheering for choreography. They were reacting to pain, rage, and the kind of righteous fury that makes you feel heavy even though it is just a movie. The Yang family is shattered in battle, betrayal rots the foundation, and what survives is a single thread of honor being dragged through mud. Gordon Liu steps into the storm as the surviving brother, a man who isn't simply mourning but transforming. Lau's films always respected technique, but here he treats technique like a spiritual consequence. The story keeps circling around family, duty, and the question of what a warrior is supposed to do when the world has already taken everything. The iconic sequences are the kind you don't forget. If you ask me what elevates it within the subgenre, I would say that the credit is due for its chasing truth. The theme running through it is sacrifice, and the character arc is essentially a man turning suffering into structure, grief into geometry. I would go so far ahead as to say that it's one of those Shaw films that leaves a bruise on your memory and then makes you grateful for it. Mad Monkey Kung Fu, 1979. I walked into Mad Monkey Kung Fu expecting another straight-ahead Shaw revenge picture, the kind where honor gets shattered in the first reel and rebuilt with bone-breaking discipline by the last. What I didn't expect was how mean the setup feels or how Lau Kar-long turns that cruelty into something weirdly cathartic. Lau directs it, and he also steps in front of the camera, playing a monkey-style master whose reputation is his lifeline. The story hits you with humiliation, not just violence. violence. Lao's character is an opera performer and respected kung fu teacher, but he's also vulnerable, with alcoholism as the crack the villains wedge open. Lo Li, a specialist in reptile cold antagonists, plays the gangster and brothel owner who orchestrates a trap designed to destroy the master's name and life. The framing is vicious, with a staged accusation and a punishment that feels like the genre's worst nightmare. His hands get crippled, his credibility gets butchered, and his sister is forced into servitude just to keep him alive. Then the movie pivots, and that pivot is the magic trick. Enter Xiao Hao, a street-smart scrapper who becomes Lao's last shot at setting the world right. Lao shoots the training with the same respect he gives Hung Gar or staff work in his more traditional classics, which is why the comedy never turns weightless. When the action hits, it hits with that old-school Shaw clarity. The fights have this scrappy, low-to-the-ground flavor, like the movie itself is refusing to stand tall until it's finished proving something. What makes Mad Monkey Kung Fu a must-watch is the emotional engine under the antics. It's a story about how a master survives after the world takes away the part of him that defined him, and how teaching becomes a kind of revenge that's bigger than fists. When I think back on the legacy of Shaw Brothers, I think this is still one of the most rewatchable Lao films because of how complete it feels. Killer Constable, 1980. Killer Constable is one of those Shaw Brothers films that feels like it was shot with a blade instead of a camera. Directed by Kui Chi-hung, it stars Chen Kuang-tai as Leng Tian-ying, a righteous lawman trapped in a rotting system, doing his job so efficiently it starts to look like a curse. The title alone tells you the tone isn't playful. It's the late Qing era painted as a maze of corruption and poverty, where being good doesn't automatically mean you can make anything better. What makes it stand out inside Shaw's catalog is the way it weaponizes atmosphere. The cinematography is harsh with shadows that swallow people whole, an action that often feels like it's happening in the corners of a nightmare. Chen Kuang-tai plays Leng like a man trying to keep his soul clean while wading through filth, and every fight scene becomes another moral compromise. The movie was made through a Hong Kong-Korea co-production setup, filmed partly in South Korea, and even had an altered Korean market version with different scenes and plot changes. That kind of fractured identity fits the movie because the film itself is about living two lives at once, the man you are and the weapon that your position forces you to become. As a martial arts movie, it's less about styles and more about consequence. The combat has weight, but the real tension comes from what each act of enforcement costs the hero internally. It's been widely praised as one of Kui Chi-hung's best films and even included in major best Chinese language films lists, and watching it now, you can see why. The Magic Blade, 1976. If the first viewing of The Magic Blade feels like falling into a silk-draped labyrinth, the rewatch feels like discovering the labyrinth was designed to trap your emotions. Chor Yun's wuxia is built like a haunted romance, where the real weapon is the way everyone wants something they can't safely admit. This film comes from Gu Long's world, filled with Ni Kuang's screenplay, and you can feel how it was greenlit to energize wuxia with a cooler, more stylized edge during that mid-70s genre shift. The action itself is sharp, but what makes it unforgettable is the mood around the action. Cho doesn't rush into violence. He lets conversations stretch until they become unbearable. When blades finally come out, it's like the truth finally stops pretending it's polite. The fights are fast, elegant, and decisive, and they never feel like filler because they always land as turning points in relationships. And that's why the film works as martial arts cinema even without leaning on the training montage pleasure of straight kung fu. It's wuxia where martial skill is inseparable from identity. Critics and historians have called it one of the strongest entries in that brief wuxia revival wave, and I could absolutely feel that best of the best aura when the film is firing on all cylinders. Human Lanterns, 1982. There are Shaw Brothers films that thrill you, but Human Lanterns dares you to flinch. It's a martial arts movie dipped in horror, the kind of late-era studio shocker where elegance and ugliness share the same frame. Directed by Sun Chung, it stars Tony Liu, Chen Kuang-tai, Lo Le, and Ni Tian, and the premise is as lurid as the title promises. A deranged craftsman who makes lanterns from human skin, while two rival masters spiral into obsession and humiliation. The The genius of the film is that it doesn't start as pure horror. It starts with wounded pride, jealousy, and social games that feel almost like wuxia melodrama. Tony Lu's Lung Shuai is wealthy, proud, and desperate to keep face, while Chen Quan Tai's third master Tan Fu needles him publicly, using status and cruelty like weapons. A small insult becomes a blood feud, and the feud becomes a doorway the real monster walks through. Because while these men are busy tearing at each other's ego, there's someone else in the shadows taking notes, cutting bodies into trophies, and turning art into atrocity. That balance is what makes Human Lanterns such a singular must-watch. The gore is infamous, sure, and critics still call it one of Shaw's most notorious shockers, but the film doesn't work only because it's nasty. The sets feel theatrical, the lighting turns quarters into threats, and when the violence hits, it lands a cold, surgical confidence that makes your skin crawl. Modern reviewers often point out how it blends well-choreographed kung fu with a streak of horror and gore, which is exactly right in my humble opinion. This movie is obsessed with jealousy, with how quickly desire turns into ownership, and how easily honor becomes an excuse for cruelty. Everyone wants to be admired, feared, and remembered. I even think that the story echoes the pop culture shadow killers like Ed Gein, which makes sense because the film's horror isn't supernatural, but human and real. Not watching the movie is a criminal offense if you call yourself a martial arts fan. Executioners from Shaolin, 1977. If you ever wondered why the Shaw Brothers era hit like myth carved into stone, Executioners from Shaolin is the answer. Lau Kai-long directed this one as a kind of tragic kung fu scripture, pulling from the legend of Hung Hei Quan and shaping it into a multi-generational revenge saga. The setup is classic, but it's told with the confidence of a master who knows he's writing history. Shaolin burns, survivors scatter, and the shadow hanging over everything is Pai Mei, played with icy menace by Lo Le. Our hero, Hung Chen Quan Tai, is a man trying to rebuild a life in the middle of a nightmare, hiding with rebels on those iconic red junks, then finding love, family, and a home. The film doesn't treat peace like the end of the story. It treats peace like the thing that makes revenge even more painful, and I absolutely love the idea. There are sequences in this movie that feel like you're watching Kung Fu evolve in real time. The fights are raw, cleanly shot, and brutally legible, and Lau's choreography has that signature you can feel the weight transfer authenticity that modern action still chases. But what makes this film special is the emotional hook hidden inside the technique. Hung's wife is a master of crane style, and the story quietly becomes about pride, compromise, and the difference between strength and wisdom. And that's where the title really lands. This is about legacy and about the kind of violence parents accidentally hand to their children, and how the next generation is forced to finish the fights they never started. Decades later, it still plays like an essential chapter in the Shaw canon. It's emotional, brutal, weirdly intimate, and it shows what Kung Fu does to a life. The Avenging Eagle, 1978. Directed by Sun Chong and powered by Ni Kuang's hard-edged storytelling, this is wuxia as moral punishment, a redemption tale where the past doesn't just haunt you, but hunts you down. I love it how the premise hits with that perfect Shaw cruelty. Ti Lung plays Chik Ming Sing, one of the Eagles, an orphan raised by a bandit chief, Ku Feng, and trained into a living weapon. They're engineered killers, branded by loyalty, and when Chik finally breaks away, it's because he sees a different life for one terrible second. On the run, bleeding out of his old identity, Chik crosses paths with Chuk Yi-fan, Alexander Fu, a wandering avenger with hidden wrist blades and a grief so sharp you can hear it when he moves. Their partnership is the soul of the film, two men walking the same road for opposite reasons. One wants to atone, one wants to destroy. And the further they travel together, the more the story tightens into a trap, because Sun Chong frames every quiet campfire moment like it might be the last time these guys are allowed to be human. The action is pure Shaw efficiency, but there's real style in how it's staged. Every kill feels like it's taking something out of the hero as payment. Most revenge films let the hero burn everything down and stride away like a legend. This one asks, what if the hero is also the crime? What if redemption isn't a victory, but a sentence? I don't expect such deeply philosophical thoughts from a Shaw Brothers movie, but I surely don't mind. By the time you reach the final stretch, you're bracing for what the story demands. I can assure you that watching this movie will be the best time you spend for entertainment. King Boxer, aka Five Fingers of Death, 1972. There are martial arts movies, and then there are martial arts movies that change the temperature of pop culture, and King Boxer is one of those. Directed by Zhong Changhua and starring the volcanic Lo Le, this is the film that helped ignite the North American kung fu craze when Warner Brothers released it in the US as Five Fingers of Death in March 1973. Watching it back, you can see why audiences lost their minds. The story is simple, sharp, and ruthless, where a young fighter, Chao Chi-hao, leaves his home school to train under a superior master and earn the right to marry the woman he loves. It's a classic go prove yourself setup, but the movie keeps twisting the knife. Outside forces close in like vultures, and the martial world reveals itself as a stage where honor is constantly being tested and constantly being betrayed. Then the film drops its iconic hook, which is the Iron Fist technique. This is the kind of pulpy, supernatural-leaning kung fu concept that screams crowd pleaser, and Shaw knew exactly how to sell it. The choreography is big and clean, the hits land with that old-school thud, and the camera makes sure you understand what you're seeing. But the secret sauce is how mean the movie is about ambition. It's about what people will do when they realize they're not the chosen one. The martial arts community becomes its own corrupt ecosystem, and our hero has to survive it with both fists and soul intact. I think the reason why King Boxer still rules is because it's foundational. You can draw a straight line from this to later secret technique cinema, even to modern fighting game storytelling. One-Armed Swordsman, 1967. I still remember the shock of it, because the One-Armed Swordsman felt like the genre growing fangs in real time. Zhang Che directed it like a declaration of war, starring Jimmy Wong Yu as the wounded anti-hero who helped usher in a new, bloodier style of swordplay. It was massive, and it became the first Hong Kong film to hit HK $1 million at the local box office, basically rewriting what success looked like for Shaw Brothers action. The story starts with a classic martial world premise with a noble master, a school, a talented student taken in from humble origins. But immediately the movie digs into something uglier: class cruelty, pride, and the way honor is often just a mask for insecurity. Fong Kang is looked down on by wealthier students, and the tension builds until one moment of humiliation turns into catastrophe. His arm is severed, and suddenly it goes from a heroic journey to survival. I really admire how the movie treats disability and reinvention with brutal sincerity. Fong Kang becomes a legend because he's forced to rebuild himself from the ashes. A peasant girl saves him, loves him, and hands him the half-burnt remains of a manual that becomes his new path. The training feels desperate, improvised, and almost feral. It's a man learning how to exist again. And when the violence returns, it hits harder because we understand the stakes. Chang Che stages the action with operatic intensity, and we get ambushes, betrayal, bodies dropping not as spectacle but as proof that the martial world is a meat grinder. What makes this a must-watch for me is that it's a classic that gave wuxia its anti-hero swagger. You can feel its DNA in countless later films. Even now, it's very rewatchable because every scene carries weight and every strike carries history. It's the kind of film you finish and immediately understand why Shaw Brothers became untouchable. Dirty Ho, 1979. Dirty Ho is the kind of title that makes people smirk until the movie starts, and suddenly you're watching one of the slickest kung fu comedies ever staged with a straight face and a master's precision. Master Wang is secretly the 11th Prince of Manchuria, living undercover as a refined jewelry dealer who's trying to figure out which of his royal rivals wants him dead. Enter Ho Jan, a loud, not-too-bright jewel thief nicknamed Dirty Ho, who runs into Wang and keeps trying to pick fights with him. The joke is that Wang never wins the way you expect. He turns the environment into a weapon. Ho swings, trips, crashes, gets embarrassed, and never understands how. And that's where the film becomes magic. Lau Kar-leung choreographs comedy like ballet. The action is full of fake weakness and hidden skill, with Wang constantly protecting his cover while silently dismantling every threat in the room. One minute it's brothel showdown built on petty vanity, the next is a poison blade scheme that turns a musician into an accidental combatant, and the whole time you're watching a masterclass in fight without looking like you're fighting. What makes it stand out in the Shaw library is how deeply it commits to the theme of performance. Under the laughs, there's real warmth too. Ho Jian isn't just comic relief. He's a chaotic good soul who keeps getting yanked into a bigger story than he understands. Wang is lonely, trapped by bloodline, and quietly desperate for one trustworthy ally. The student-master bond that forms between them feels earned because it's built on humiliation, survival, and reluctant respect. And when the film finally lets the action go bigger, it doesn't abandon the concept. The fights stay clever, the comedy stays sharp. It's one of those movies you can show to someone who thinks old kung fu is all grim revenge melodrama and watch their brain rewire in real time. Come Drink With Me, 1966. Before the martial arts boom became a global machine, Come Drink With Me arrived like a bolt of lightning in a quiet sky. Directed by King Hu and starring the radiant Cheng Pei Pei, this is a foundational wuxia masterpiece, one of those films that teaches cinema new body language. The story begins with a kidnapping. The governor's son is taken by bandits, and their demand is simple and cruel. The rescue mission falls to Golden Swallow, the governor's daughter, who walks into an inn disguised as a man and instantly establishes herself as a lethal presence. This opening stretch is pure elegance turning into violence, and King Hu stages it with a dancer's rhythm. Then the film adds its secret ingredient. A beggar called Drunken Cat drifts in, comic at first glance, chaotic and sloppy, until you realize he's watching everything, orchestrating saves from the shadows. When the ambush hits, when Golden Swallow is outnumbered and poisoned, the film pivots into something richer. What makes Come Drink With Me essential is that Cheng Pei Pei plays Golden Swallow with steel in her spine and actual personality in her eyes. I am in awe of the action choreography, credited to Han Ying Che, which has that operatic clarity that still looks gorgeous today. The film's signature weirdness comes from how it can be playful, mysterious, even lyrical, and then suddenly it's brutal. The monastery sequence turns spiritual space into a battlefield, and the villainy feels sickening because it's rooted in corruption. For those who don't know, the film is historically massive. It's widely regarded as one of the greatest wuxia films ever, and it launched Cheng Pei Pei as a major star. I can confidently recommend this to anyone because it is impossible to dislike the film. I know the list goes on, but these are my picks. I would love to hear your take on the movies in the comments below, and also share your thoughts on some other Shaw Brothers films that you have enjoyed watching during the magical golden era of Kung Fu.